Listening to some of you, especially Marshall and Laura, it sounds like you must live in a different country than I do. And it seems like your country is a democracy, but my country is a corporatocracy, and it doesn't work like that. You know, as an example, last year during the climate legislation, we knew that our representative, Jim Matheson, was going to be very important in that climate debate. He's the leader of the Blue Dogs and on the Energy and Environment Subcommittee and all the committees that write that legislation. And so a bunch of us met with him. Our group met with him. Several other local groups met with him ahead of time. And we also organized at all kinds of local events and got names and phone numbers of hundreds and hundreds of people in our area so that we could let him know exactly how we were feeling during the debate. We had someone in Washington watching him and letting us know instantly everything that he was saying, so that when he said something significant, we could trigger this phone tree where we each called 3 other people and they called 3 other people and we all called the office. And so the first time we did that during the hearing, we got a couple hundred calls into his office that said, hey, I heard the comments you just made an hour ago, and thanks for your statements about the smart grid, but I'm really disappointed you're putting all our hopes on clean coal, blah, blah, blah. We had it backed up on our website so that everybody was sending the same message. Then the second time we did it a couple days later, we had 450 calls into his office that same day.
So your question is basically, what do you do when you've got a member that's totally immune, seemingly, to all this incredibly good and effective pressure you're putting on him?
Well, what he did at that point was he went underground. He skipped the rest of the markup, skipped the floor debate, helped to weaken the bill behind the scenes. And it taught us that we didn't really have a democracy, and that he didn't care about what we said. So we had to get rid of him. And so we started a grassroots process of running a primary challenger and are working on building a democracy there in Utah. But it's a slow process, and frankly, we didn't get any support from the national groups, including PDA. And we appealed to those groups, saying, this is who we're up against. We really need to get rid of him. He's not listening to us. So are your groups willing to actually take out those weak Democrats who aren't on our side?
I'll speak to that. Yes, we are. I remember talking to some people from your organization, Tim, and I had quite a long conversation, and I backed your effort 100%, by the way. With our organization, we're really are grassroots driven. This is, everything comes from the bottom up. So when we endorse candidates, there has to be a chapter in that area. When we endorse a candidate, we want to know we have people on the ground who are going to do what Brett said. They're going to get out there. They're going to get out the vote for that candidate. They're going to be knocking doors. Then we'll bring the rest of the group from around the country in for phone banking. So that's basically why we were unable to help your candidate, because we just didn't have a chapter established there. So I apologize for that.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't need that. First of all,
You do for the camera. So we can pick it up.
Okay, so first of all, this is Tim DeChristopher, if you don't know. He's one of my great heroes. Stand up, Tim. And so it's a real honor to have you here, Tim. Our organization, Citizens Climate Lobby, is a 501c4, and we are disallowed for lobbying or backing particular candidates. We work on legislation. And just to be clear about it, what we want is what Jim Hansen was talking about, is a substantial, steadily increasing price on carbon dioxide, really all greenhouse gases, starting with carbon dioxide. We would like to see it start at $15 a ton, like John Larson's bill, going up $10 a ton every year. So we cannot go after candidates.
Can I just finish my
Sure.
comment? But to answer your question, at any rate, Tim, is that we all know, we in PDA know how you feel, because we are an electoral group. We are a PAC. We're not a 501c3 or a 501c4. Our purpose is to elect progressive candidates that support our agenda. That said, it's a tough row to hoe. There's a lot of forces that are working against us. There's all this corporate money, and literally what corporate control of Washington, D.C. There's a media that's working against us. We have a lot of issues, but nothing beats getting into your community and talking to the people in your community face to face. PDA saved 2 candidates this year from the Tea Party. They were pouring money into Jim McGovern's race in Massachusetts and Raul Grijalva's race in Arizona, and our members were out there with other organizations knocking on doors, making phone calls, and they poured a lot of money and a lot of advertising into both those districts, but it was that old-fashioned, door-to-door grassroots campaigning that saved those 2 seats, both progressive Democrats who support our agenda.
Good. Question here?
I just want to follow up and thank Tim and encourage him not to give up on the first cycle. Just to depth a little bit with what Laura just said, I also work with PDA, and in addition to the candidates you just mentioned, Laura, that we help turn back the Citizens United money, we do take on incumbents. And a good example for you, Tim, and not to give up, is out in Maryland. We took on Al Wynn, who was a corporate Democrat, pro-war Democrat, with Donna Edwards, and lost the first time. Came back the second time. She was the first African-American woman elected. We took on a pro-corporate Democrat in the primary. This past election cycle, in addition to the races Laura talked about, Marcy Winograd was a candidate who had the courage to take on Jane Harman in the primary, not once but twice, on the question of Palestine and Israel. So it's not going to happen this term. It may not happen in the next 5 or 8 years, but don't give up. Don't pull the plug. Run that candidate. I hope you kept all the names in the database. I hope you're walking precincts down. I hope you have a voter file. And I hope you're out there now and you keep dogging that member and not to give up. And we have to grow this movement. We as PDA can only do so much. That's why we're here. We need to reach out with you and Marshall and grow this movement. So I commend you in your work you're doing. Most importantly, don't give up. Keep fighting.
Thank you.
Yes. I also live in the, I'm a member of the Progressive Democrats in North Carolina, but I'm also in Tim's country, which I think at this stage, we're running to build a movement and to make it electoral is running people into a brick wall.
Yes.
And the question is, the question is how, to me, is how to build a movement that organizes without trying to run people into the brick wall of influencing a member of Congress who are just about impossible at this point. I mean, I think the only functional place of democracy, and it's fragile and endangered, is local government, is county government and state government. You can do a lot more there. You know, it seems to me that we have to get a movement built, we have to have people have successes. And I don't see any successes until we get much more of at the electoral level of Congress, until we have much more of a movement built on local successes. And I'd like to give.
Yeah, I'll give you a response, but let's get another question out as well. Yeah.
I was just wondering, you guys are talking about corporate influence and what your position is on campaign finance reform, specifically the Fair Elections Now Act, which was introduced, or at least co-sponsored by Representative Larson, in terms of allowing our voices to actually be heard by the members of Congress. I was wondering what your take is on.
Okay. All right. We'll do that question on electoral reform. Let's take one more.
I'm Peter Vickery from Amherst in Western Massachusetts being a state where 80% of the seats go uncontested. So picking up on my friend's question from the front, the federal work is really important, and the work on trying to undo Citizens United, that's interesting too. But while Congress is in the hands of a Republican, the states are still there. So my question is to the, not so much to Laura and PDA, but for the environmental organizations, what state level policies, as opposed to politicians, what state level policies are you getting behind to try and plug the federal level gap?
Okay. Do you want to take, who wants to take the last question?
Well, we don't do local. We just do
Yeah.
federal.
Yeah, as far as the question of state-level policies, there are about, I think, 26 states that have passed legislation. Maybe that's a little high, but it's close to that. That mandates that generally it's by 2020 that 20% that there be a reduction of emissions of about 20%, maybe 15 to 20%. Also, there's a renewable energy standard and a renewable electricity standard that in that state, that a certain percentage of energy, again by 2020 needs to come from renewable sources. Those are certainly state policies that have been enacted in many places, not in every state. So that certainly is a major one in terms of policy on a state level. I just wanted to say on this question of elections and, you know, what Pete raised in terms of situations where it's just, you're kind of like hitting your head against a brick wall. You know, I mean, I definitely have been related to and involved with elections for a long time, 40 years, basically kind of from a more independent standpoint. I think we need alternatives, actually, to the Democrats and the Republicans. We need a true, we need a true multi-party democracy, which we don't have. We basically have a two-party duopoly. I mean, that's my own personal view. That's not the position of the organizations that I'm representing here today, but that's my personal view. But I also work with a lot of Democrats and some Republicans on issues, right? And we need to be about, day after day, the organizing around the key issues. And in our particular case, we're talking about the key issues of climate and shifting to renewables and stopping coal plants and so on. We've got to be doing that work, or we're not going to be credible when it comes to telling people they should support a certain candidate. If we're not working on the issues that people in a local community or in a state see as important issues, they're not going to look to us as being credible messengers when it comes to who they should vote for. We have to be known as people who are out there giving leadership on these issues on a day-to-day basis, and not just come around on election day. And people aren't saying that. I know Laura and Marshall are definitely not saying that, but I think that has to inform kind of how we approach electoral work.
Let me have you in a second get the campaign finance. I was not saying that the same group that's doing the lobbying has got to be a group that gets involved in elections. If you've got the capacity there are different laws that govern it. And it's important to think about, you cannot absent yourself from the voting process or you will not be taken seriously at any level. And I'm nonpartisan, as being part and past chair of the League of Conservation Voters Board. You try to get the bipartisan support that we had in the 70s when we passed 30 major federal laws. What I'm talking about is that groups will be organized and working around issues effectively. But you've got to realize then an election is coming up. The forces at work are going to be preying on all those people, whether it's a local level decision, a state level decision, a federal decision, to try to actually prevent something from happening on climate, from pricing carbon, trying to pull the rug out from under you. You've got to be able to have some entity, and there are a number in the states, so that your troops, your forces, then can go to work for those who have a variety of selections of candidates at the different levels, and they can pick and choose. You don't have to be in the position here in advance going in, oh, well, I'm going to be in support of this or that person. No, you get your issue going. But if you do not think about voting, I'm just telling you, I think our movement, if we had gotten as political as the National Rifle Association, okay, and scaring the hell out of people because they go right to work on elections. We think, oh, we are riding above the political fray. Our hands are pure. We don't like any of these they're not really good enough. Whoa, then you are just not going to get the access and the results that we need to get if we're going to deal with all the forces that are destroying the planet. That's my pitch on elections. And would you talk a little bit about, then we had the question on public financing, various campaign financing reform legislation, the organizations doing campaign finance reform issues?
Well, Progressive Democrats of America, and me personally, is firmly in support of the Fair Elections Act. We are in support of proportional representation because clearly that's what needs to happen. And fair, open, transparent elections, get rid of these voting machines, you know, paper and pencil works really good, and there are numbers of reforms that would help give voice to the American citizen, to we the people, over these other vested interests. So I just want to go on record with that. But it is important to remember, it is frustrating. It is like knocking your head against a brick wall. But no, as Marshall said, or perhaps it was Ted, I've forgotten now, all great social movements have basically won. But it wasn't like that. It took years. It took decades. Look at what went on in South Africa with apartheid. That was decades and decades of struggle. And we're in a struggle right now. And we're also transitioning from this into this technology age as well. So there's all these dynamics going on, and it can make you feel very frustrated and disconnected from reality, basically. So you got to never say die. You just keep at it. But in the end, all this organizing, whether it's at the local level or at the state level, it all ends in the ballot box. This is how we're organized. There's a government that creates regulations and laws and so forth and so on. Everything ends up in the ballot box. So voting, even if you have to hold your nose to do it, is not a privilege. It's a duty. It's a duty of an engaged citizen. And what we're talking about at this conference is really advanced citizenship. It really is about totally understanding what your role is as a citizen and exercising your rights in every single way that you can. Because when you don't exercise your rights, they start nibbling away at them. And that is happening in this country as well. So it's get off your chair, it's get out there, it's meet other people, it's vote, it's organize on issues. It's when you start organizing on issues, you end up in the ballot box because it's like issues one year, campaigns the next. It's just no matter what your interest is, it all leads to the ballot box.
Good, Liz, 2 questions over there. Let's take those 2. Daphne. No, you don't need it. We'll
throw out another possible organizing strategy, namely trying to develop clean jobs in areas where, for example, military contracts are prevalent. This is something that we've been working on at the Institute for Policy Studies, analyzing the military spending, which is the climate security spending, and trying to break down by districts where there's potential for switching the military contractors, the military recruiters to actually be employers around green jobs as a way of kind of working within the existing reality where basically our members of Congress are holding more to industry and to whoever's the highest bidder. And so I just wondered if you had any comments on that as sort of an interim strategy given the corporate control that we have right now.
Okay, that's one question. Second.
Why don't you get that one first?
Well, let's do 2 so we can move,
right.
and we get more questions on the table.
I think the last time we beat the oil industry was maybe the Alaska landfill. I used to work out of Eureka sector.
Yeah.
And we organized every single congressional district and key contacts similar to what Tim was doing. And then the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement, people were really out in the streets demonstrating. And I think I had a conversation with you, Tim. I think you should speak to that. That this generation is not making that I'd say getting out in the streets and getting arrested and all that kind of thing. It's not happening as much as it had in the past. Maybe you can speak to that.
Okay, two questions, and one is an effective organizing, mobilizing tactic around clean green jobs, especially around potential
military bases, and can we say something more about the potential of demonstrations, arrests, and much more strategic protests?
Is organizing, maybe pulling lots of organizations together. There were hundreds of organizations that pulled around the Alaska Coalition to do the campaigning in states. In our case, it's really the coal and oil states that are.
Sure. Yeah. So in other words, you're doing a lot of the cutting edge stuff, but it's in an ever enlarging coalition made up of groups of different sizes and fitting the area. Yes.
So I just want to say a word about my congressman. When he was 19, I think it was 19. You want to tell us a little story about what are you going to tell it this afternoon? Okay. All right. All right. But it's so tune into the story, and it's about courage. It's about Tim, but Tim, that kind of thing. So we'll wait for it.
Who wants to?
Yeah, on what Daphne mentioned, I'd be interested in talking to her more about it. I was actually part of something called No War, No Warming, which existed for a couple of years, and we had a couple of civil disobedience actions. One of them was on Capitol Hill, where we had 68 people arrested, blocking traffic going down Independence Avenue on the House side of where all the congressional buildings are. And we very consciously were linking the issues of war and warming. And so what, Daphne raised in terms of a kind of a green jobs focus, with connection to alternatives to military, I think is, it's a good idea that needs to be pursued. I actually was going to say something in my talk, but my time kind of ran out to mention nonviolent civil disobedience. I believe that if there was ever an issue that needed people willing to risk arrest, willing to go to jail, it's this issue of the climate crisis, because of the consequences for the Earth and for the people and the life forms that inhabit the Earth if we don't get this right, if we don't build the movement and make the changes in enough time. I'm on probation right now. I was arrested for hanging a banner inside the Senate office building that said, "Green jobs now, get to work," about a year ago, the first day that the Senate came back from its summer recess last year. And I was convicted of a couple of misdemeanors and had various parts of my sentence. I didn't have to go to jail, but if I'm arrested any time between now and July, I go to jail automatically for 30 days, plus whatever else sentence I would get. So I've been arrested 5 times on the issue of climate since 2006. I would encourage people to seriously consider that. Talk to Tim over here, who's another example of a willingness to take action like that, and it's critical. It's absolutely critical, and that is growing. There were 118 people arrested at the White House 2 months ago protesting mountaintop removal. It got a lot of press coverage. It was on the front page of the Washington Post the day after it happened. That was because of leadership out of Appalachia, from the states where mountaintop removal was happening, for this coalition. There was like about 100 organizations that were part of this coalition that did this action that led to all these arrests right in front of the White House in a really good action. So that has to build up, absolutely.
Yeah, I can't exactly put my finger on it why my generation, the generation before me, was more out in the streets than the current generation. I think to some extent that has to do with public education and dumbing people down who don't understand their role as a citizen in the country. I was taught in my public school education all about the Constitution and what my role was, ever from grade school up, and now you get like a quarter at your senior year in this kind of civic education. So that might be part of it. I think another part of it is kind of like what they did to the word liberal. It's like, oh, demonstrating's bad, so it kind of, they're subliminal messages. But demonstrating is important, and it's what needs to be done, and it can happen in a number of different ways. One of the things that PDA does is once a month, the third Wednesday of every month, we have over 100 in these brown bag lunch vigils, we call them, set up in congressional districts around the country. And the idea is, take a bag lunch and go hang out in front of your congressman's office. We offer ideas anywhere from corporate control to we have a campaign, Windmills Not Weapons, and yes, we understand it should be wind turbines, but it lacks a certain flair when you say it. So, and we have the Healthcare Not Warfare campaign, and we just get out there every month, and we have a letter that we deliver. So we have a little visit to the office, and we have lots of allies: United for Peace and Justice, Code Pink, Backbone Campaign, just to name a few. And so we're welcoming people, to these, to establish them, and these are in the district, and it's not a big, huge demonstration, but you know what? The mainstream media isn't going to cover us anyway. So when you're in your local area, your local news will be there, your local radio will cover it, you'll get the local coverage, and that's the coverage that matters. These are your neighbors. These are the constituents of your congressman. So don't get too focused on the big message and the big media. These little local events really have an impact. And for the nearly year that we've been doing them, we've changed votes. We've got anti-war votes from congressmen who are voting for the war. So it's an effective thing to do. And reducing military spending is a way to pay for a lot of things. It's a way to invest in the research and development for green jobs. It's a way to protect the environment. It's a way to provide health care. We waste an awful lot of money on the military, so Daphne's suggestion is top notch, and I want to talk to her about it.
Yeah, it's great. The Defense Department is the biggest single energy user in the world. And if they were, just think if we put a little more attention there with their huge procurement, I mean, they could buy totally fuel-efficient vehicles. They're big. All of their purchases are bulk, so they can tend to drive a market. Some bases have actually put up solar. So let's go to two more questions. One there, and I see one back there. Okay? Yeah.
Maybe another question, but a comment on what you just said. Good and bad news. Bad because it's military. The good news is advancing this agenda. A Times article last month said the Army wants to be 50% green, 50% carbon reduction by 2020, in 9 years, because Afghanistan drove that, the difficulty of the terrain, the mission, the loss of their oil convoys, and they're already fielding solar arrays and switching to LCDs. And I think as millions of people come to the Army system, they will unfortunately learn that this stuff really works and it's not science fiction. It's some good news for everybody.
Good point. Yeah, we have a big economics question based upon the growth economy. It's not just U.S., but if the world's running on a growth economy, is that actually sustainable? So we'll take one more question here.
Yeah, I'm thinking about your comments on protesting and civil disobedience. And as a student, in my experience, I've talked to a lot of people who are kind of disillusioned and discouraged by sort of the traditional styles of protesting. And I think, I mean, it seems to me that it's less that public schools are dumbing people down, that there's, it's just hard to see what really works. And so I was wondering what advice you had for students who may not have been involved before and who might be discouraged by traditional sort of sign-waving type protests and may feel like they have no political power besides their one vote.
Okay, so we got two questions. One about economic root causes in the growth economy, and another about developing better ways and more effective ways of protesting, especially as
from the standpoint of students.
Regarding organizing, and I just encourage you to be on one of our introductory calls at Citizens Climate Lobby. You'll be on the call with 10 or 12 people from different parts of the country, and you'll see more in depth the system that we use. It's not a system that we're making up as we go along. It was written about in this book called Reclaiming Our Democracy, Healing the Break Between People and Government. And we have a lobby system that is working and we're going to get some a carbon tax. I believe that. And so just there's something else about simplifying our life. I'm sure we've got to do that. I think that was the essence of it. Everybody, I think, has to simplify their lives.
Yeah, just on your question, you know, young people always have more energy and generally more creativity than older people. I mean, it's just, I think, if you think about it, it's kind of logical. So one of the things that you look at the civil rights movement. I mean, you had organizations that had existed for decades. The NAACP was the primary one, but in the 1960s, literally in 1960, there was an organization of young people with just a few adults involved called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. And they formed, and they came up with their own ways of organizing, their own approaches. They definitely wanted to learn from the activists that had come before them, and the ones who they respected were basically allowed to interact with them. A woman named Ella Baker, in particular, who people should check out. Ella Baker, she's an unsung heroine of our entire history in the United States. So I would say, you know, check around, learn from other groups that exist that have been used traditional tactics, but also be creative about new ways. You know, that's very important. Just quickly on the question about the economic system, You know, I've had arguments with friends of mine who, you know, say, hey, you know, things are so terrible, you know, unless we make a revolution, it's all over, right? And I say, hey, fine, that'd be nice. We do need, you know, we do need a new system. We need a different way of things to be organized. I mean, because it is true that the economic system that we have that dominates the world, I mean, the name of it goes by capitalism. That system is destroying the world. It just is. I mean, it really is. So we need a different system, but we need to stop climate change. We need to get off of fossil fuels. We need to give ourselves, and in the process of building that movement, we're going to be able to do things at local levels, decentralized, you know, more simple lifestyles, you know, build relationships and alliances with people around the world, and begin to find other ways of being about living and developing economies that are in sync with the earth. Bill McKibben's latest book, Earth, has some really good stuff about this, so I'd urge people to check that out.
Yes.
I want to pin down the civil rights thing just for the students here. In 1960, 4 black kids from Greensboro, North Carolina, decided they had enough of not being served a cup of coffee at a Woolworth lunch counter, and they sat in it until they were served or until they rested. 4 kids. Within 60 to 90 days, people were sitting in all across America. Now, because they didn't necessarily, why did they do that? I mean, how did that have, that little 4 kids? Because it was easily replicable to do. Anybody could sit in. And it was a clear moral issue, which a lot of people did not know about. A lot of people didn't know that the laws segregated people of color from white. And so, clearly you had a moral issue, you had an easily replicable act. Now, there's a creativity in this room to figure that out for climate change. I mean, if we just sit around for a half hour, we could figure things to do that have that impact. I mean, I was trying to do that, think about foreclosures, for example. I had 200 people, we surrounded a house in my district on a morning where the sheriff was going to foreclose on a lady who, I mean, it was not only illegal, it was immoral. And half of us were going to be arrested, half of us were just surrounded. The sheriff and one of the biggest banks in the world backed down from us 200. They didn't want us, they would have had to arrest us, and I think that would have spread all over America, frankly. But if you take an issue and just think about it for a while, we could come up with these kind of actions. I mean, the civil rights movement, God didn't hand down these tactics of sit-ins and freedom rides and marches. People sat down and said, what do we have to do and how do we do it? And we can do that. I'm going to talk about more of that in the afternoon panel when I have. But I mean, I think that the civil rights movement has a lot to teach us. You don't have to be limited. We got stuff we never had before. I was sitting in at a bank just a few months ago to protest this foreclosure, and all of a sudden I realized I had a cell phone. I mean, I've been sitting in for decades, and I didn't know how to communicate. Now I had all my people outside. I could talk to them. I could text. I could get the press there. I mean, we have such technology available to us. They ran a revolution in Manila a few years ago. They got rid of a president just by text message. They said, meet us at 10th and 8th in Manila, and 10th and Maple in Manila, and 100,000 people showed up. And in a few months, the president resigned. I mean, we got so many tools available to us, but the basic tactics, are pretty easy. And we can, with the people and with the technology and with a moral kind of clarity, I think we could do anything.
Yeah, so we're getting toward the end of our time. You might also look at Saul Alinsky, some of the great
Bean roast, eating beans for 3 days. He's bought 100 tickets in the front row seats at the symphony, and they're all going to show up unless they get. But just a question, the woman who asked.
20 people can block any talk show.
Yeah, just a question on the economy here that you asked. You might want to look at this book, Prosperity Without Growth, and go to the website steadystate.org if you want to see questions about growth economies as being unsustainable. So steadystate.org and this book, Prosperity Without Growth, submission to the UK Sustainability Commission. Do you all have any final comments? We got a lot more questions, but we're supposed to have
Go to lunch.
concluded at 20 after, so.
I just want to say that every time I open a newspaper and I see the people of France out on the streets, I just jeer. It's just like, go France, go. So, I mean, those people don't take it. When the government tries and takes their rights away, they're out there on the streets. They're striking, they're blocking traffic, they're not going to work. So when it comes to what's going on, and if they're doing it in France, how come we in America aren't doing it here? So that's that's the thought I want to leave you with.
Go to citizensclimatelobby.org. Check out the time of our introductory call on December the 1st, and love to have you join us.
And I'd just say people should think about and study what it means to be an organizer. Think about that. We have a president who actually was a community organizer, who called himself that and who was one. And let's all think and learn about organizing and what it means and do it better.